The Seraphim, a book by Joe Vetromile. The dark, seedy motel room was nothing special, just someplace discreet where two lonely souls could meet for an hour, also without being noticed too much. It was also where they could act out their dirty little secrets and pretend that nobody else knew. But the room that night had become much darker than expected, and the sound of heavy breathing filled the stale night air with its unholy rhythm. The obscured bodies of a man and a woman moved violently across the weathered old floor. It even creaked in places as their tangled naked masses rolled over it again and again. At first glance, you might think the two of them were struggling, but you'd be wrong. Catherine Beck was a 25-year-old superstar when it came to having casual sex in a dark, dingy motel room, and she was proud of it. After rolling around on the dirty floor for a few more sensuous minutes, the two of them finally stood up. Catherine forced the man up against the wall and began to kiss him hard and rough. Not the way you see it done in the movies, but hard and rough as though Catherine was auditioning for a part. This was beginning to resemble something straight out of one of those trashy old romance novels that your mother used to read back in the 60s, but the man was no Fabio. It wasn't about reality anyway. It was about perception and lust. It was about that great lie that variety is the spice of life. And if there was one thing Catherine knew for sure, it was that all men believed that great lie. "This what you want, baby?" Catherine taunted as she kissed every part of the man's face. Before he could even answer, Catherine ripped his shirt from his chest. Then there was the sound of more ripping, accompanied by moans and groans, mostly his. Catherine buried her beautifully manicured fingernails deep into his back as he tried hard not to flinch too much. He had never been with such a beautiful and aggressive woman before, and it was exhilarating, even a bit frightening at times. He didn't realize that this was something she had done on many occasions to garner a story, but even if he had realized it, it wouldn't have mattered much on this night. For a guy whose intimate encounters with attractive women were far less common than his fantasies, he could only take so much pain with his ecstasy, and even the hottest of passions had their boundaries. "Take it easy," he yelped, but of course he loved every decadent second of it, and she knew it. Shivers ran up and down his spine like small bolts of demonic lightning every time she touched him. Catherine bit his chest harder than she should have, and drew blood this time. He reacted to the painful chomp and pushed Catherine away, hard, causing her to fall backward onto a musty, old, torn-up bedspread. After a slight pause, he jumped on top of her and grasped her face like a man in love. But he wasn't a man in love. Not tonight. He was just a man caught up in a frenzy of forbidden lust. He kissed her neck passionately and pulled her hair back at the same time. In fact, Catherine struggled to keep her moist lips pressed up against his because the pulling was so forceful. Her fingers dug in even deeper, and blood appeared as she raked her long painted nails across his bare back again. He didn't yelp this time, but he wanted to. Catherine switched places with the man. Now on top, she leaned forward and bit at his neck like some movie vampire as he arched his back in pain. Good pain. Sweet pain. He groaned and wondered how much longer he could endure all this pleasure. A lifetime was his conclusion. Catherine sat up, straddling the man's chest now, and seductively wiped a drop of blood from her lower lip. She caught a brief glimpse of herself in the old broken-down and cracked dresser mirror, and was impressed by just how good she looked up there. Vanity had always been the sleeping dragon that, when awakened, could slay any of her foes. "Had enough?" Catherine asked, knowing full well she was just getting started, and this guy was clearly under her spell. Catherine Beck was in complete control, which was exactly how Catherine Beck liked it. For as long as she could remember, her long blonde hair and dark blue eyes made up for any credentials she lacked as a writer. 4 more years in college, 2 years doing grunt work at a local news station? Forget it. Long legs, a great tan, and the willingness to sleep with any potential inside story were all this Harvard-educated woman ever needed to get the job done. She was easy, but not in a trashy sort of way. "Don't know if I can take much more," the man moaned, praying she would never stop. "Want me to slow down?" Catherine asked playfully. "No," was his groaned response, as Catherine dropped her head down to his chest and began to seductively lick at it, like a cat lapping up warm milk. Men loved it when she did that, and it never failed to make their toes curl with anticipation. That was just one more important bit of information about men she had picked up over the years. "I get the story, right?" Catherine whispered, making sure this guy understood the rules of engagement. "Yes, yes," he moaned, just before crying out in ecstasy. Or was it from more pain? It was getting hard to tell the difference between the two. At that point, he would have gladly given up his firstborn had Catherine asked him to. About an hour later, Catherine and the man exited the motel to find a cold, damp, and rainy night awaiting them outside. She wasn't very tall, only about 5'5" or so, but that long blonde hair that flowed halfway down her back seemed to make her look taller. Those soft golden locks were her most prized possession, even over that incredible body God had blessed her with. The man was obscured by Catherine's slender frame, but when she turned to say goodbye, the world, had it been watching that night, would have noticed that the man was a Catholic priest. "I'll call you later, Father," Catherine jokingly said as she adjusted her dress and messed up her hair a little. "Not at the church," the priest warned. "And don't call me that." The priest hated to be called father by the women he slept with. It somehow made him feel dirty. Even though Catherine was only the fifth woman the holy man had indulged his sexual appetite with since taking his oaths, he promised himself, and God, that this would be the last time. Of course, this was also the fifth time he had made such a promise. "Of course not at the church," Catherine replied sharply, feeling insulted that he would even suggest such a thing. Sure, she wanted the story, but for Catherine Beck, sleeping with a man of God was much more than simply working for food. It was symbolic and made a statement. The father she rarely saw growing up was the pastor of a local church. She could remember loving her daddy more than life itself, but as soon as she celebrated her 7th birthday, his late-night visits were becoming more painful than fun. He was arrested 3 weeks later for raping the little red-haired girl down the street, little Catherine's best friend, Monica. After that, Catherine decided that if man was created in the image of God, then she wanted no part of either. Just a few feet away from Catherine, a drunk, wet, and dingy old man was sitting up against a dilapidated old building with his outstretched hand pointing right at her backside. He knew this priest from the week prior and was sure he could get paid by a priest who needed contrition. "Spare me some change, Father," the bum grumbled in between coughs and hacks. The priest glanced over at the old man and realized he had seen this guy before. Catherine, never one to show charity to anybody she considered weak or dependent, adjusted her slight frame in front of the priest, obscuring the old man from his view. All the old-timer could see was long blonde hair draped over subtle curves. It reminded him of his younger days. She is so beautiful, he thought. Gazing at her even made him think back about the young daughter he had lost years earlier to a drunk driver. "I'll call you at 12, Catherine said to the priest as she played with her hair a little more. Not to be ignored, the bum stood up quickly and accidentally bumped Catherine's arm as he stumbled forward for his payday. "Please, haven't eaten in days, Father. Can you give an old Catholic altar boy a better help?" The priest sighed and reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. Catherine quickly snatched the bill from his fingers before the bum could. She turned to face the old man, as an unholy rage brewed just beyond those piercing blue eyes. It was a rage that seemed to always rear its ugly head whenever Catherine wasn't in complete control and getting her own way. "Get away from us, you disgusting pig!" she shouted. Then she pushed the poor transient hard, causing him to slip on the wet pavement and tumble onto his backside. The old man twisted his ankle and smashed his elbow against the concrete, but he realized it was time to get out of Dodge, so he did. "There's no call for that," the priest said angrily as he hurried over to assist the old man to his feet. But the bum was already up and hobbling away before the priest could reach him. "He was hungry," the priest mumbled, with a little more disdain in his tone now. Catherine casually walked over to where the old man was sitting and picked up an empty whiskey bottle. "Thirsty, maybe. I think he recognized you. He must go to your church, Father," she remarked sarcastically. "Maybe someday. You should preach on how to get a job and take a bath once in a while." Then Catherine casually tossed the empty bottle into the street, and the glass shattered into a million pieces. It was the perfect metaphor for two lonely souls who had lost their way many years ago. She placed the 20 in her pocket and smiled glibly at the gullible man of God. "We have a deal then, right?" she asked, holding out her hand for the priest to shake. "You're something, lady," he groaned as he grasped her tiny fingers. "That's what I'm told," she replied. Catherine loved the attention she got from men, especially from so-called holy men. "When can I see you again?" he foolishly asked, knowing full well it should never happen again. Catherine grinned and looked down at her watch in a sudden panic. "I'm late. Email me. I want names and dates." She hailed a taxi, jumped inside, and sped away like Batman answering a call from Gotham City. The priest was left standing in the light rain as he thought about all the reasons why he should go straight to hell for his sins. He decided it would be better to just go home instead. Under stormy skies, a taxi pulled up behind a big black Mercedes and stopped in front of a run-down motel. Catherine stepped out of the taxi like royalty and tossed the cabbie a 20. He wanted to sleep with her so badly he could taste it, and she knew it. And she loved it. "Keep the change, honey. Remember what I said. You make the rules." The taxi drove away just as Mark Hall, a slim, balding man in his mid-30s, stepped out of the Mercedes and approached the pretty blonde. The first time Mark was intimate with Catherine Beck was 3 years earlier, when she was just a 22-year-old wannabe searching for a job as a cub reporter. Even back then, she was audacious and knew exactly what she wanted out of life: money and success. And she didn't care much how she got them. He remembered thinking at the time that she was much too attractive and way too sexy to ever be taken seriously as a news reporter, especially with those long legs and that butt. He wondered, fantasized really, about how her hair would look braided and put up. He really loved her hair. He immediately hired her the next morning. Boy, was he wrong about Catherine. Sure, she was everything a man might fantasize about, but she was also smart, really smart, maybe too smart for her own good. "You're late," Mark said in his manly, businesslike voice. "I'm never late. You shouldn't even be here," Catherine barked back as the two of them looked up at the wreck of a motel and frowned. This place looked like it should have been condemned 20 years earlier, just like Mark. "Nobody should be here. This is a bad idea, Cat. No way are you going into this dump alone." Catherine seductively reached into Mark's coat pocket and pulled out a small tape recorder. Did this jerk really think he called the shots? He wasn't much to look at, and Catherine hated sleeping with him, but she needed him as much as he wanted her, so she just chalked it up to on-the-job training, his on-the-job training. As long as she kept his fantasy alive, she was in complete control. "I might need this, sweetie," she whispered in his ear as she seductively fingered the small recorder. She never missed a chance to let a man know what they might be missing if they didn't cooperate. "I'm going in with you," Mark proclaimed, even though he knew she'd never allow it. And besides, it was the last thing on earth he wanted to do. "You're not going in with me," she responded in a matter-of-fact tone. No way was Mark Hall going to get writer's credit on this one, she thought. Mark looked up at the motel again and frowned. His fake performance as a concerned boss and lover was magnificent that night. "I told you I'd think about letting you do this one alone." Mark took another discouraging glance at the place, putting on a full show of a man pretending to be brave and concerned. "I thought about it. No way. End of discussion." Mark was proud of himself for faking standing up to this female version of himself, even if it was all imaginary. No woman had ever spun him inside out the way this one did, but he didn't mind much anymore. So long as he could be with her every now and then, he'd be more than happy to give in to her demands once in a while. After all, what man could resist her charms? Catherine reached over and pulled Mark closer to her as she pressed her large, firm breasts up against his scrawny chest. This maneuver never failed to give her the upper hand, a fact that wasn't lost on Mark. It was all just a big game anyway, to find out who could use whom. And in the end, everybody always got what they wanted. "Remember that little trip to Tahoe you wanted to take next week? I told you I'd think about it," she taunted. She pulled him even closer and slipped her arms around his waist. Then she grabbed his butt. End of discussion. Catherine licked Mark's nose and smiled. "You at least got a charged cell with you this time?" Mark asked. Catherine held up her cell phone. "Fully charged," she announced. "I'd say give me 15 minutes with this guy. You don't hear from me, ride in on your white horse. Now get in the damn car, Mark. Can't you see it's raining outside? She glanced over at the rear window of the car and smiled. Then she winked, as though her best friend was sitting in the back seat. Catherine gave Mark a quick kiss on the lips and fearlessly walked into the rundown motel like she owned the place. That's when the rear window of Mark's Mercedes powered down and revealed Tim, a good-looking 25-year-old cameraman who had been sitting quietly in the back seat while Mark and Catherine playfully sparred. He had only worked for Mark all of 9 months, but in that time, he came to understand how things really worked at a television news station. Mark was the sitting king, and everybody else the loyal subjects. But Tim really liked Catherine and hated to see her abused. He was one of those white knight kind of guys who liked saving women from themselves. The fact was, Mark was a coward at heart, and everybody in the office knew it. If Mark thought there was any chance of danger with an interview, he'd make sure somebody else took the story. Tonight, Catherine Beck was that somebody else. "I can't believe you let her go in there alone," Tim scoffed, wanting to make certain Mark knew that he knew it was a despicable thing to do. "I know. She's as stubborn as she is gorgeous. She'll be fine. Cats always land on their feet, right?" Mark grinned. Tim powered the window up as Mark hurried around the car and got inside. Mark knew how dangerous this assignment was. Some guy had called the news station earlier talking terrorist attack and wanted to have a secret meeting in a part of the city that even the cops stayed away from. Sure, it was dangerous, but it was also potentially huge, and that was all that really mattered to this editor. Mark also knew that Catherine was always looking for the big story and would do almost anything to get it. If anybody could handle a madman, it was Catherine Beck.